Halloween 2001. It was about a month and a half after 9/11. I was out with my stepmother and my sisters. She didn't want to go trick-or-treating because she was paranoid. She was afraid the terrorists were going to be hiding under the masks and kill us. Because it was a crazy time. That's the same reason that my principal at the school that I was at the time, I was in middle school, 8th grade, he wouldn't let us do Halloween that year for that same reason. So instead of trick-or-treating that year, she took us to the Paramount Theater. The same theater that 7 years later, I would go see Psycho. That exact same day. 7 years to the day. And I watched a movie for the first time at the Paramount Theater again. Well, for the first time, because I did these episodes backwards. I should have done Psycho first, actually, because no, I did Psycho first. I'm all sorts of mixed up. Anyway, the film was The Changeling. It came out in 1980. Of course, I didn't know that. I could just tell it was old. And I could also tell it was one of the scariest movies I had ever seen. It was directed by Peter Medak, starring George C. Scott, Trish Van Devere, and Melvyn Douglas. It still remains one of the scariest movies I've seen. It's very subtle. And this is the first time I'd seen it in like 15 years. I didn't remember much about it. And now that I've seen it, I realize like all the scares are really in the first half. I'm not going to spoil anything because this is kind of a hidden gem. It's considered a cult film. So it is known. It's known enough to be on Peacock. If they take the time to add it to a streaming service, it's not some obscure thing that no one's ever heard of. It's on Peacock. That's how I saw it. However, nobody I've asked has seen it. I knew at the beginning of the month what my Halloween movie was going to be. And I've been asking people all month, have you heard of The Changeling? Not a single person has heard of it. My sisters have, obviously. They just, nobody else has. But I will say, like, this film is more complex than I imagined. I didn't remember a big chunk of this movie. Like, the second half of this movie, I didn't even remember. There's, like, an entire, like, not even a subplot. It, like, is the plot. I just remembered the scary parts. That's all I remembered. And those parts are still very effective. I'm not going to spoil what any of the scares are. But this film is more than just like a horror film. Like, when I tell people, oh, it's a haunted house film or it's a ghost story, people like, oh, no, they're like, oh, those are boring. Those are very boring. This isn't what you're thinking. This is not what you're thinking. I don't like a whole lot of modern horror films because they rely too much on CG or it's blood, guts, and gore. Okay, first off, blood, guts, and gore, that's not scary. That is gross. And so many people that I've been asking people, like, what's your favorite scary movie? Because, Scream. I ask people what's their favorite scary movies, and a lot of them say, like, these blood, guts, and gore horror films. Oh, it's so scary. It's so bloody and gory and scary, and I love it. I'm like, that's not scary. It's gross. And this is not that. Oh, and sometimes they'll say, like, a bunch of these CG heavy movies, it's fine. People like what they like. I don't judge too harshly. This was made in 1979. It came out in 1980. I want to say it's low budget. Actually, I got the Wikipedia right here. Was it low budget? It was made on, I don't know if this was low, but it's just adjusted for inflation. It had a budget of $6.6 million, and it made $12 million. So I don't know if that's adjusted for inflation. It doesn't appear to be. Okay, that's for 1980. For 1980. That's a big budget. I I wish they would have in parentheses like, here it is adjusted for inflation, or the original, or one of those. My point is, most of the effects in here are practical. I mean, because this was back then, they didn't even have CG back then. So like everything was done in camera for the most part, and it's my favorite kind of horror film are like basically the subtle ones. Like I don't even want to give examples. Like there's not a lot of modern horror films I actually like, and I was planning on just like listing some of my favorite modern horror films, but I don't want to because I might cover them in a later movie, in a later episode in future years. I need other horror films for future years. There was 4 movies. I was wanting to do a bunch of horror movies for this month, because ever since I started Digressor season 4, it's 2 Casablanca, 2 Digressors a month. So I was going to change that for this month and do a review a week of Casablanca, just because there's so many horror films I want to review. But I stuck to Psycho and The Changeling. They're 2 of my favorite horror films of all time. And as you can see, I've got stories to go with it. And I want to tell some of the stories, but they're spoilers. Okay, I'll try to tell this without being spoilery. Something I'm glad that I was kind of nervous about seeing Psycho at the Paramount, because when I saw The Changeling, the staff was using moments from the movie to scare the audience. Like there's a moment where a ball bounces down the stairs, and it's a very suspenseful moment, and they roll a ball down the aisle, and everyone screamed. And I was like, I know Psycho is one of the like this classic horror film that I don't want it to be ruined by. But no, they didn't. That was just, we went to a midnight showing, and apparently midnight showing of horror films is different than a regular showing. So it was an experience for sure. But yeah, I do highly recommend this movie. It is, I can't stress, okay, Psycho, I didn't mind going to spoilers, because either everyone's seen it already or everyone knows the spoiler. This one, however, because it's so obscure, I can't say too much about it. I can, however, continue what I was saying earlier. I kind of digressed a little. This is the wrong podcast for that. That's what my other one's for. Anyway, the first half is a haunted house movie, but it's leading somewhere. It's not just, scary for the sake of being scary. I mean, it is, but it has a purpose. And they very quickly find out. It's not like, if this movie was made today, what you find out halfway through the film would have been like the shocking plot twist. And when it happens, I'm like, wait, I thought this was at the end. wait, why is it happening now? And I look at the time, I was like, this is only 40 minutes in. There's still an hour and a half to go. And, or however, I don't remember the time that was. I think it's like an hour, like an almost 2 hour movie. Anyway, the second half, it's kind of like a detective story. It kind of reminds me of The Ring, where there's the scares, but it's also kind of a like detective story where she's trying to solve the mystery of what's Samara's story. Why is she doing this? Let's dig to find out the truth. And that's the second half of this movie. When you find out the truth and like everything's revealed at the end, you get the full story. Everything makes sense. And what's kind of funny is the first time you watch this movie, that's like, because, like I said, it's a subtle horror. The first time you watch this movie, there's sounds. Like, it is, like I said, it is a subtle horror film. It's not like jump scares in your face. I don't think there are any jump scares in this movie. Not that I don't remember there being any. But there are, like sounds, things that happen, like things that bang in the night and sounds, even things in like, it sounds like it's in the score of the movie. It's all in there for a reason, and you find out at the end, or even halfway through it, like I said, what that is. Like, everything makes sense by the halfway point, and at least by the end. But the first time you watch it, you have no idea what's going on. And watching it again, knowing what the secret is, it's like, oh, this is even creepier. It has rewatchability. I hadn't seen it in so long. Watching it in 2001, that wasn't my only time to see it. I saw it a couple more times over the next few years. I showed some of my friends, but I hadn't seen it since like 2008, I think. Maybe, I don't know. It was at the library. It ties back into the other one. I went to the library, saw Psycho, and I saw The Changeling, and then I went to God at the library. But yeah, I checked it out at the library, like, years and years after. 2008, 2009. It must have been 2008. No, 2009, because I saw it in my apartment in Texas, and I moved into my apartment in 2009. So it had to have been 2009. Or 10. One of those times. Doesn't matter. I haven't seen it in a very long time. But yeah, like I said, this film definitely has rewatchability, because you go back and you notice things you didn't notice. And the story just, it's so good. I was literally only reviewing this because the scares left an impression on me. And then I go back and I watch it now, and I see the story is like so much longer and complicated than I thought. And they speed through the story too. Like in modern, and I go, if this was told now, if this was a new one, they would drag it out. They would just drag this whole thing out. But no, like they get to the scares quickly. Like he moves in, and then yeah, like again, like in under an hour, like you figure out what's going on and why. And how is this to get to the bottom of the story of why, or why the why, the reason for the why. I wish this was more popular, because I want to go into spoilers. It's hard. That's just why I stopped doing movies that but for the first few episodes, I'd go to the theaters, watch a movie, come back and review it. It was really hard to not give spoilers. And that's my problem here. But yeah, I want to review the other horror films that I was going to talk about. I should do No, I was thinking about doing a like a top 10 episode, like my top 10 favorite horror films. But then, like, no, if I'm going to have a list of episodes, I have a list of scary movies. I'd rather just do an episode each, give each one their own episode. Another thing that happened, one of the main things that happened every time I would ask people if they've seen The Changeling, either they would outright say no, they've never heard of it, or there were a few people that said yes. However, it was followed by, I love Angelina Jolie. Like, no, that's Changeling. This is The Changeling. I found out, Changeling, it has a meaning. And I don't remember what it was. Okay, so, hey Google, what's the meaning of changeling?
Here's the definition of changeling. A child believed to have been secretly substituted by fairies for the parent's real child in infancy.
So they'd use the loose definition for this movie and the yeah. I can't spoke, okay? But they use the loose definition for both movies. And that definition is as close to spoilers as you're going to get for this movie. And I highly recommend this movie. Again, it is on Peacock. I realize I've stopped rating movies. I didn't even notice it until the other day. And I was like, wait, did I rate Psycho? Did I rate the other ones? I don't remember what. And so I don't know if I addressed it here on the podcast, but I introduced this series as a movie review podcast. And I had a friend tell me to stop calling it that because, in her words, you're not reviewing the movies, you're just discussing them. And I was like, isn't that the same thing? And she said, no, it's not. It's not the same thing. And I was like, well, you don't know what. Yes, I looked it up. Yeah, it's not the same thing. So this is, I for a while now, the last few episodes, I haven't considered this a movie review podcast. I even stopped referring to it as that. I stopped saying, oh, I have a movie review podcast. It's just a movie podcast. So I guess I just kind of stopped rating movies. I think with Psycho and this one, you can probably guess what my rating would be because I just showered them with praise. There's only a couple of complaints I have about this movie, and they're not really that big of a deal, but I noticed it as I was watching it. So there's a scene where there's a seance, and during the seance, the medium has, she has her hand, she has a pencil in her hand on a big sheet of paper, and she just doing like big motion scribbling, and her assistant aide, whatever, I don't remember what he is, but he would constantly pull the paper away. There's another sheet underneath, and they kept doing this, just doing these big motions with their hands, like scribbling, and it's like, yeah, it's a cool visual. My complaint comes when George C. Scott's character is looking at the paper. There's like small words written on it. Like someone took the time to like handwrite. That's, you don't see her do that. You don't see her stop to write words. She's just doing these big scribbling motions. And then, like on the papers, you see the scribbles, but then, like in between the scribbles, there's like words carefully written and perfect print. Like, that's not what I remember her doing. And I believe that is my only complaint with the movie. There was another small complaint I had, but don't I don't remember it. Something else I did notice. This isn't really a complaint. It's just kind of an observation. It's nothing to do with the movie, really. So I thought the Space Needle was the tallest structure in Seattle. By the way, this takes place in Seattle. I thought the Space Needle was the tallest structure in Seattle, but there's a moment in the film where the characters are in like the top of this office building, and the Space Needle's in the background, off in the distance, and you're very clearly like way above the Space Needle. I'm like, wait a second. Actually, you know what? Let's see. Hey Google, is the Space Needle the tallest structure in Seattle?
According to Wikipedia, at approximately 605 feet, the Space Needle was the tallest building west of the Mississippi River at the time it was built by Howard S.
But it is now dwarfed by other structures along the Seattle skyline, among them the Columbia Center at 967 feet. So that is not an inconsistency. That was just something I was like, wait, what? Why are we above the Space Needle? Okay. Well, that's all I got for this movie. I'd have a lot more for this movie, but I can't say it without it being spoilers. But I've said enough to send you on your way. I want everyone to go see this movie. It's on Peacock. Peacock is free. I mean, you can pay. There's an ad-free tier, and I don't know, some of these types of things, they'll place ads in random places, and a film like this, you'd be in the middle of a suspenseful scene, and then an ad pops up. So either way, it's on Peacock. Go watch it. Go watch this movie. I'm gonna stop talking now, and I want you to go to Peacock and watch The Changeling. I'm going to pull a Columbo and say, one last thing. I was editing the audio and I realized there was one thing I forgot to mention. In the part when I was talking about modern movies having, being CG filled, there was one thing I was going to mention. The closest thing to a modern day version of this that I can remember, that I've seen, because I haven't seen every single movie, the closest I've seen to this that has been made in modern times has been The Woman in Black, starring Daniel Radcliffe. That is the closest thing. If you've seen that, it's pretty much like the same type of thing. However, even that is CG filled. So that one's an amazing movie, but it's a CG ghost story. So if they were to make this movie now, we would get that.